Internet Explorer. In this nugget, we take a look at Internet Explorer. We take a look here at the providers and add-ons in Internet Explorer. These are things such as toolbars that you might use. These will be things such as translating web pages to a different language, or blogging, or email, looking at maps for addresses that you might have found on the internet, things of this nature. We also take a look at in private settings, which will help to protect your privacy so that others will not know what you've been doing. We also take a look at security and security zones. This is particularly important for things such as intranets or other trusted sites, as well as being able to protect yourselves against untrusted sites. And then we also take a look at certificates, the importance of them, how they work, and also how to add certificates so that you can trust them when necessary. All right, let's talk here about some assorted topics right at the beginning that don't really have a place of their own later on. So I want to go ahead and make sure we address some of these. One of those would be something called compatibility view. You see, with each succeeding edition of Internet Explorer that comes out, there may be older web pages that are based on previous editions of Internet Explorer. So on the current version 8, they may not show up very well. So maybe it was designed for Internet Explorer 6, maybe it's just not updated very often, or Internet Explorer 7. And if that's the case, you may need to go to compatibility view. Let me show you how that would look. Here we've just got a browser open, and you can see that I've gone to our own cb2nuggets.com website here. But let's just say that this was really designed for Internet Explorer 7. Now, we actually do work very well with all current browsers. But if I had to go to compatibility view, I would simply click this little broken page looking thing, and you can see here that it would now show that I am in compatibility view. That's just a simple little thing you might have to do sometimes if the web page does not appear correctly in the current browser, Internet Explorer 8. All right, let's move on here to file extensions. You may have also known that as file, if I can write it here, associations as well. And this is where if you double-click on a text file, Notepad opens. If you double-click on a spreadsheet, Excel opens, and so forth. You have a similar thing there in Internet Explorer as you do on your desktop for when you open those other types of files, and that is that depending upon the applications you have installed, any number of different things could open one of those applications. This is particularly true, for example, of various types of media. So, for example, if you open up a JPEG file or download a JPEG, there may be an option in the dialog box to also open or save that. And if you open it, which application is it that's going to open it? For example, Nero, which makes the CD burning software, they have some kind of a photo viewer. I can't remember what it's called, but if you install that, then that'll probably be the default. You might need to change that default from time to time. Especially because whatever application you installed last usually kind of seizes control and makes itself the default. Now here's another example of file association, as well as getting applications that you might need. This is the phone that I recently got for my daughter, and she wanted the user's manual, or needs the user's manual. I doubt if she'll read it, but I tell her that she's got to read the whole thing from cover to cover. That's because I'm kind of a geeky guy who always believes in reading the instructions. I'm sure that's going to be very well received. Anyway, so here's the English PDF file for this, and this is a brand new browser, a new computer, so there was really no add-ons of any type installed yet for an Internet Explorer, and I did not have Acrobat Reader. So when I first clicked this, what happened was it gave me an option to save it. Well, now I've installed Acrobat Reader, so we can see here that by the file association with PDFs, it's going to go ahead and wait for it to download, and then once that's done, I get an option here. It's in protected mode because it's on the internet. So remember, that puts it in a low integrity location, and I'm going to allow this because I know what this is, know what this application is, and I'm going to accept the licensing agreement for this Acrobat Reader. And while I'm waiting for that to download, let me just quickly go here to Tools and Internet Options. Once we get into this, we see there's a Programs tab, which is where you're going to be able to set the various programs for the file associations. And so you could associate a file type with a protocol or program, and that's just where you would go. And you would just identify which kind of a file extension you would want and what kind of an application will open it. And as you can see by way of example, there's a lot of media types of files here, audio, video files, which most of them open up with a Windows Media Player, but I don't really have anything else installed at the time. So if we go down to PDFs, we should see here that since I've installed the Adobe Acrobat Reader, it will now open up using that particular application. And that's how you would just simply set that kind of thing. And we see it now opening up in Acrobat Reader, and there you go. So that's how you can work with that sort of thing. Another thing you might want to look at is really simple syndication, or RSS. And what this will do is it'll give you live feeds of various types of information. So, for example, if you're a news hound and you're always got to have the latest news. Let's see, I often go to Fox News. Let's try that. Go to Fox News, and if you go into this, you'll see that there's an opportunity right up here. You notice how this turned orange, this little button on the toolbar. Anytime it turns orange, that means that there's an opportunity to use RSS with this. So I'm going to click on this and choose Fox News RSS, and there we go. And I now want to subscribe to this feed, and this is part of your favorites as well. Okay, you can also add it to the favorites bar, which will show up here, but I don't really need to do that for the time. Well, actually, I'll do that. Why not? So I'll subscribe to this, and then that's how the subscription would take place, how this RSS subscription would go. And you can see that it has indeed added that item up there. Now, one of the useful parts of this, let me kind of minimize some of the rest of this stuff here. One of the useful parts of this is if I go into my desktop here and I right-click and choose Gadgets, that we should have an there it is, a Feed Headlines item. So I can just drag that out to the desktop. And we should be able to see in this that if I configure it, it'll be able to go to the Fox News item and show me late-breaking headlines. And there you go. Now you see some headlines that have popped up into this. You can see up here, for example, we've got some real problems with wildfires here in Arizona right now up near Flagstaff. They think they were human-caused, and because of wind and dry conditions that we have in Arizona, the wildfires just spread very, very quickly around here, and it caused a big problem, apparently. So anyway, that's a news feed. If I want to keep up to date on those sorts of things, I can do that using RSS. Another thing you'll need to know about is how to work with various providers in your add-ons. This is actually kind of the same thing, although the exam objectives separate them. They say you need to know how to configure providers and manage add-ons. They're really the same thing. When you configure your providers, you're working with your add-ons. One of the examples of an add-on here would be a toolbar. Now, sometimes toolbars can be particularly troublesome because a lot of adware, spyware, and other malware will install toolbars a lot of times without the user knowing it, or they'll be tricked into installing it. And then sometimes it's very difficult to get rid of, and you'll probably have to use some kind of an anti-spyware product to get rid of it, some kind of a security software from Symantec, McAfee, whatever. And you're supposed to be able to remove that stuff within Internet Explorer with some options that you click, except that some of the more malicious ones, or pestery ones, if that's a word, pestery, they will re-add themselves without your consent sometimes. So that can be quite frustrating. And in fact, here I've got an example of someone who has a serious spyware problem. You can see here that they've probably installed every toolbar that's ever been made. I've had this screenshot for a long time. But anyway, you can see that even their whole browser is pretty well crowded out. This is the only room they have left to browse. I guess the only thing they're left to do is to just meet sexy singles, and that's pretty much it. So that's a big problem there with users, especially if they're having also some kind of security problem with malware that may be adding these toolbars. Now, I don't have enough room for toolbars here because of my resolution. I tried to add the Google toolbar to show this to you, but let me just show you just quickly here that if you have any toolbars up here, you can add or select them or remove them by checkboxing them. So, for example, right now I've got the command bar. I click that, and you can see that it goes away. That was over here to the right. Let me add it back in, and then it comes back again. Same thing with the Google toolbar. If I had enough screen real estate to show it to you, it would be able to pop up on there. But I don't have enough room, so it's going away. But that's very simply how you would work, at least with the toolbars there. Although, again, in a comically insane case such as this one, you're probably going to have to use some kind of security software instead. You may also have to work with various extensions. It's kind of similar in some ways to file extensions, because file extensions, of course, will open up certain applications. Well, there's certain content on the internet that also needs to work with extensions, and a good example of that would be something like our own web page here. Again, this is a new browser. We haven't installed anything yet, and you can see I haven't installed Microsoft Silverlight. So I would need to install that extension, and I'd have to run this. And then give permission at various stages in this as it tries to install itself. And then with that extension installed, we could go ahead and play our media player. So I'll go ahead and click on yes here and install. And you can see here that just in a moment we'll have our our person here on the front cover of our web page who's cheerfully recommending our products here. Let's go ahead and give this a chance. There she is. Isn't she nice? She's a welcome face to CVT Nuggets. And I might add, much better looking than most of our trainers. So at least we have something to brag about there on our website. By the way, we are going to a new beta site, and by the time you get this particular nugget, we should already have it out. But I'll show you something else about that in relation to security a little bit later on. So we'll revisit that in a moment. There's also the file associations. I guess I repeated myself kind of there, but that's really pretty much the same as file extensions. And you can also work with the search items. For example, going back here again, notice that up here in the top, it goes to Bing as Microsoft's website by default. Well, very often, I don't really want to use Bing. I still kind of prefer Google. So how am I going to change the default search? Another thing to note there, by the way, is that if you do a search over here, question mark, and then type in whatever word it is that you're interested in finding. Let's do James Conrad. Hopefully my prison record doesn't come up. Oh, I'm an author and physics researcher. Interesting. Anyway, that's actually not me, folks. That's somebody else. Apparently, I'm not famous enough to even make it into this particular search engine. So this search engine must not be very good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change search providers. I'm going to manage my search providers here, and then I'm going to find a different one. Okay, so I'm going to find more search providers. And another thing that's very useful, look at this checkbox, prevent programs from suggesting changes to my default search provider. A lot of times, again, spyware, adware, and other malware will try to change that without the user's consent. So here I'm going to go ahead and use the Google one, and I'll add that to Internet Explorer and just click on Add. And I think I forgot to do one of the things already there. It's already there, but I got to go ahead and select that one, don't I? So I'm going to manage my search providers here. Now that Google is here, again, I want to prevent programs from suggesting changes. I'll set that as my default. And now you can see that Google does appear. Let's see if it works with me now. James Conrad. Hopefully Google has better results. Nope, I'm still a professor of some kind, apparently. Oh, there I am. CBT Nuggets. There we go. So you can see that immediately, since the CBT Nuggets hit came up right on the first page, that is clearly a superior search engine to Bing. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at a few other things going on here as we look at our providers and our add-ons. And one of those would be the various accelerators that you can use. This is actually kind of cool. And what is an accelerator? Well, it's kind of just that. It's something that allows you to work with a web page faster than going through other multiple steps to get to the same result. For example, if we go back to our web page here, maybe I want to know what that would look like if we were to translate the whole thing into some other language. Well, I can right-click on something down here, and notice that when I do that, it says all accelerators, and you can do a number of different things here, and they're already also included here, but one of the items you can do is to translate. That's kind of fascinating. So what if I wanted to translate that into, Hebrew or something? So I'll translate this page, and then in the back over here it creates an additional tab, which will then show me the translation, English on the left and Hebrew on the right. At least I think that's where it puts it. Let's take a look. Yes, so that's how it looks apparently. Notice that when we go into the Hebrew translation over here, that some things don't particularly translate over, and that would be because things that are like graphic elements, they may not appear or something like that. But otherwise, we can see that we get a pretty nifty translation out of this. This is a lot faster than going to some kind of a translation website or something like that. And another thing I like about this is that maybe I want to find more about the word complete here. Well, I can blog about it and tell people about how complete the training is at CBT Nuggets. Or I want to email a friend of mine something about CBT Nuggets. I know it sounds self-promoting. I'm just using this as an example, that's all. And then all the other accelerators. You can also find more accelerators. I do this a lot of times for maps. For example, I like to use Google Maps, and so I'll just go to Google's. They've got one on here somewhere. And if I'm looking up a store or something like that, then I've got the address on the browser, then I'll just right-click on it using my accelerators and go immediately to Google Maps. Makes it very easy and quick to find something. You may have also heard of something called in private mode. What in private mode does is it will temporarily retain your browser data, such as your cache, your history, your cookies. So, for example, if you were checking your email privately and you didn't want other people to go back through the history and look at the email messages that you had seen, you might use in private mode. So, for example, one of the reasons why you would want to keep cookies in your existing session is because as you're flipping back and forth between messages in your webmail, you need that cookie to maintain your logon. But when you close the browser, it's going to clear all of those things out. Okay. For example, I just recently used in private mode. Guess why? No, not for that. Thanks for thinking positive of me, by the way. No, I was shopping for my wife's anniversary present, and I didn't want her to use the computer to find out where I had been shopping, so that she would know what I was going to buy her for our anniversary present. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Also, we can have the in-private filtering that goes on here as well. And what that's about is a lot of the websites will have a common banner ad producer that puts banner ads on all these different web pages. So, for example, I was looking for some backpacking equipment yesterday, and as I was going to all of these websites, they all had different banner ads and things. If they came from the same company, those banner ads came from the same advertiser, well, they can find out my browsing habits based upon those. So what this would do, in-private filtering would prevent them from being able to do that. Now, that might be useful. You might not want to turn it off because when it tracks your habits there, it can also suggest certain products that you might be interested in. But if you want to turn that off, I'll show you how to do that here as well. In fact, let's just go to our browser now. And for this, as we take a look at our browser here, if you want to go to in-private browsing, then simply press Control-Shift-P, or you can click on Safety and then choose in-private browsing. And then any activity that I have in this session, including any tabs that I open up, or any pop-ups that open themselves up here, will all be in private. At least they're supposed to be. Then what would happen here is, when I closed out this browser, it should delete up all of those things, my history, my cache, and my cookies. Likewise, if I wanted to turn on in-private filtering here, then when I do that, it will prevent the advertisers or anybody else that is on a particular web page from being able to track my habits. Let's also address some additional kind of miscellaneous security topics here, such as pop-up blocking, which is mostly just an annoyance when a pop-up occurs, but sometimes you actually do need them as well, so you might need to make exceptions. So, for example, if I'm looking for a download, I don't know, for Microsoft or anybody like that, when I click on the link to download something, it may pop that open in a new browser window. But if I've got pop-up blocking turned on, then I won't be able to download that file. So what you can do with that is to manipulate how the pop-up blocker works by going to Tools and Pop-up Blocker. Right now you can see it's on, so that if I were to click here, it would turn off pop-up blocker. Are you sure you want to turn it off? Then I would say yes or no. Then if I wanted to also manage the pop-up blocker, I would go to the pop-up blocker settings here, and maybe there's certain websites like cbtnuggets.com here, and I could click add, and I would always allow a pop-up blocker from CBT Nuggets. And when you go to a website that has pop-ups, of course, it'll prompt you with a dialog box asking if you want to, well, actually, it won't be a dialog box. It'll be an item up at the top, a little yellow bar that notifies you that a pop-up attempted to occur. You can click on the little yellow bar and then specify that you want to allow it if you want to make an exception. So that's how the pop-ups are going to work for you. There's also an issue of parental controls. This is not something that works in the corporation because you cannot turn parental controls on any computer that is a domain member. Actually, there's certain things that you can do to kind of trick it into doing that, but it's not really designed to do that. So for this example, for parental controls, I'm going to go to a different computer here, which is a member of a work group. I'm going to go to Control Panel, User Accounts, and Family Safety, and then you could also just click right here to set up parental controls for any user. Most of this is pretty well self-explanatory, but I want to kind of go over the big features of this with you real quick here. So what we would do with this is, we would first of all have to create a new user account for, little Joey or somebody like this, so that we can have an account to manage, because we can't manage our own administrative account. So then we'll click on this little user here and go to little Joey. Then you can see here that once I turn this on, I can do a number of different things, such as enforce time limits. For example, for one of my own kids, I sometimes I get carried away with the internet. I mean, I kind of make my living on the internet, but sometimes you can get carried away with spending too much time there. What happened in the old days when we used to play games outside and run around and play? So I say, he can only have 4 hours of internet time. So maybe I'm going to give him between 12 and 6 or something like 12 and 5. Let's just be generous and give him 5 hours on weekdays. Okay, and this would all actually be blocked. So let me block those, and then for the allowed, I would make it those hours. Okay, there we go. Now we got control of the mouse. There we go. So that's when the only time that this person would be able to access the internet. All right, so we can do time ratings. We can also go to the game ratings. We talked about that earlier, the ESRB ratings and things such as this. Joey can play little games, but I want to make sure that he cannot play anything past teen games. No mature, no adults only, none of that kind of stuff. Okay, so we could set that sort of thing up. And then the other thing we could do here, once we get past that, is to also set up program limits. So maybe there's certain programs that I want Joey to use, not everything. All right. Maybe that could also just simply because if it's a family computer and he's curious, I don't want him to open up my QuickBooks file that manages my company and go start deleting things and writing checks to people and stuff like that. So I might say he can only use the following programs. I guess just Windows Media Player. I guess I don't really have anything else installed, so I'll just give them that. Okay, and then we can also do other things such as controlling any websites that might otherwise be deemed inappropriate. Now, you may have noticed that there's no web filtering included in this. There's no logging of any kind, history reports, that kind of thing, like there used to be under Windows Vista. So Microsoft is no longer in the business of blocking those websites and providing that kind of a service. What you can do is to download third-party products which may integrate into this interface, although the product that I actually personally like for my own family is not included there. That one is a company called Internet Safety. And I like their product quite a lot here. It's called Safe Eyes. And I don't normally endorse specific products, but I think this one's pretty good for families. And I say that because I've used a lot of the other ones out there, and many of them are just total junk. They crash. They're not reliable. This one actually is programmed pretty well and allows you to do things such as limiting the time that your kids can be on the internet and use the computer, limiting which web pages they go to, and if you need to make an exception for them, you can do so. And it will, of course, also create logs and email you reports of where they've been. And then before I forget, I want to show you this policy. You can do this on the local computer or in the domain. But if you wanted to enable parental controls in a domain environment, which is otherwise disabled by default, go to Computer Configuration Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and then scroll down here to, obviously, Parental Controls. And then you can enable this policy. And let me move the dialog box. You can click Enabled, and when you do so, it will expose the parental controls again in the control panel. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that it does not work on domain accounts. Remember I had to create the little Joey account? That was a local account, and parental controls only works with local user accounts. Okay, so even if I enable it for the domain, it will not work on domain user accounts. Now let's also talk here briefly about protected mode. This is something I talked about earlier, mandatory integrity control, in a previous nugget. This is where applications that try to execute within your browser will remain in a sandboxed area, or mandatory integrity control. If they try to escape from there, a dialog box will prompt you to allow or block them, and by clicking allow, you would allow them to go ahead and execute, and you would do that for applications that you know and trust. In fact, that's what happened with Adobe's Acrobat Reader when I tried to install that earlier when I was preparing for this nugget. Also, there's the Smart Screen filter. This is very useful for anti-phishing attempts, so that if a naive user goes to a website that's trying to, looks like their banking website, but it's actually a fake website trying to collect their logon credentials, then the Smart Screen filter may be able to discern that that's what's going on there. And if you're not certain, you could go up here to Safety, Smart Screen filter, check this website. Hopefully ours doesn't come up as phishing attempt. I'm pretty sure it won't. Anyway, so it's actually just going to be sent, this web address will be sent to Microsoft to see if it's on any phishing reported websites. Okay, and we'll click OK, and we're going to see, of course, that it did not report any threats because a CBT Nuggets website is healthy and delicious. Okay, so if you were to go to some other website that you suspected was a problem, then you could go back to the Smart Screen filter, and you could report an unsafe website if you had a reason to believe that they were trying to phish information out of you. And then Microsoft would confirm it, and they would add it to their list, and then hopefully help protect other people from going to that same site. There are also something called zones in Internet Explorer, and they're broad categories of types of websites that you would want to set pre-configured security settings for. So, for example, for the local intranet zone, let me just show you the interface first of all so we can see where we're going. The local intranet zone, if this was on my own intranet, then I would go over here to Tools, and then Internet Options. From Internet Options, I would go to Security. And then in Security, I would say, oh, this is part of my local intranet. Notice that Internet is set at medium high, but as soon as I click local intranet, it's medium low. So it's going to allow additional levels of controls to work. It's going to allow some little applications, web apps to function that might not work on intranet or restricted sites. And then on sites here, it can say automatically detect intranet network. It does that based upon my IP address. We'll take a look at IP addresses, I think, in our next nugget. And there's certain IP addresses that cannot be used on the intranet, and they're always only used on local intranets. So if I'm on the 10. Network, for example, then it would know that I'm on my own intranet, and it would automatically add those clients or those websites. Here, if I wanted to go to advanced, I could also manually add cbtnuggets.com. And for those websites as well, if I wanted to confirm that it was indeed cbtnuggets.com and not some kind of an imposter, I could require HTTPS as well. Okay, and we do have HTTPS available for CBT Nuggets after you log on. But that's where you get to the interface. And what I mentioned there earlier is if you wanted to add a site to your local intranet, one feature of that is it could prevent a logon prompt. For example, if a website for your intranet has integrated Windows authentication, then what's supposed to happen there is when you go to that website, you should not see a prompt for your username and password because it's using the credentials that you already used in your Active Directory domain, and you should be able to just breeze right on through to the website. However, if it's not part of your local intranet, then you're going to get a prompt for it every time, and that can be annoying for the users. And it really probably shouldn't have to be, especially since it's the local intranet, and should generally be considered fairly secure. So by adding your actual intranet web server to the local intranet, then that logon prompt should no longer appear, and you should be able to breeze right through. There's also the automatic option that I just showed you, and remember again, it sets your security to the medium-low setting. Also, when you go to the local intranet, it does not use protected mode. Remember I mentioned earlier that certain applications and functions that try to execute from within a browser might be blocked unless you click on allow. Well, if it's part of your intranet, then they should be able to continue on. You may still need to provide administrative permission through user account control, but they're not going to be in that protected mode that we talked about earlier. As we continue on with our zones, there's also trusted sites, which might not be intranet sites, but it might be an internet site that you actually trust. And for those, it might be a business partner or something like that. With these, very often, actually by default, SSL will be required, so that destination site you're trying to go to does have to be able to support SSL, and they'll have to have a certificate. And it's kind of a different discussion, which we'll talk about a little bit later on here, but that certificate must also be appropriately named so it does not provide a prompt to the users that might confuse them. Also, with trusted sites, if you add something there, protected mode again will not be enabled, and it sets you to medium security. With restricted sites, these would be potentially malicious sites, which usually you don't want your users going to anyway, but for me, I'm also a certified ethical hacker. And in part of my research, at times I have to go to websites that are dangerous, and I know there's a virus lurking in them. But I have to go there for research purposes and to identify threats and things like that. So I add those sites to my restricted sites so that at least I have an additional level of security because it's marked at high security at that point, and there shouldn't be anything that will then execute on its own if I'm at high security. Finally, then you'd have the security zone of the Internet Security Zone, which is a catch-all for any other website that has not been previously classified in any of the other previous zones that I mentioned. With this, anything in a security zone of Internet cannot see private data from other sites. So, for example, a lot of times what malicious programs will try to do is that they know they're going to be restricted from being able to operate at a high level because of default security settings. But hopefully there's another browser tab open with lower security, maybe something in the trusted zones or intranet zones. So as an example, here we have CBT Nuggets website. If that's my trusted or intranet zone, then I've got lower security on here, and it may have cached something that would be potentially revealing. Well, maybe this is a malicious site. Actually, it's not. It's my own website where I was just photographing some baseball players this spring. Anyway, maybe this is a malicious website. Well, without the protections of the internet zone that's already built in, it could potentially try to sneak over here to this tab and grab any data that it had already cached or been able to derive. Well, with Internet Explorer, it does not allow that to take place. It doesn't allow you to see private data from other sites. Also, it cannot change Windows 7. There may be other applications that you try to load or something like that in trusted or intranet websites that would allow it to take place. But in the Internet Security Zone, it does not allow for that. Also, it changes the security to medium-high. Now, I mentioned protected mode a few different times, but just as a quick review of that, this is in the security settings where you configure this. It's going to put the application, the web apps, in low integrity so that they cannot interact with other higher integrity objects. That's, again, where they might try to jump over to a different tab, and that's part of what the tab isolation is there that I mentioned earlier. And then here's where you would actually locate the protected mode item here. And we can see that for the intranet, it is enabled. For the local intranet, it is not. And for the trusted sites also, it is not. But it would be for protected sites. So you can see that for these two, it does not enable that protected mode. But that might be okay. It's not necessarily anything to be concerned about right away, because these should already be sites that you relatively trust anyway. Now let's talk about certificates. Certificates are very important on the internet right now because they would allow you to do things such as secure online banking, or to check your credit card statement, or to log into certain websites. Even the CBT Nuggets website has a certificate so that we can protect the traffic that goes back and forth, for example, your credentials and things. So certificates are very important. What they do is they will confirm the server's identity so that the user can be assured that when they go to www.cbtnuggets or Microsoft.com or whatever the website is, or Yahoo.com, and they log in to check their email, for example, well, they want to make sure they're going there instead of an imposter. Well, because of the certificate that's associated with the website, it can be checked. That server identity can be checked, and as long as it can be traced to a trusted certification authority, then we know that we are at the website that we think we are. Also, it does encrypt the traffic, for example, for your logons and things of this nature. Now, I do want to point out that this does not necessarily mean that you can always trust all sites that have a certificate. Let me show you what I mean. A few months back, actually it's been a couple of years back, my wife got this email. And it says here that your account has been blocked. And she was greatly concerned about this because she needed to use the debit card later in that day. And she was planning to go shopping for some shoes with a friend of hers. So she did not want the debit card to have a problem. So what did she do? She followed the instructions here. Click here to continue the verification process. You know where I'm headed with this, don't you? Okay, so she clicked on there, and it brought her to this web page. This is actually one of the best phishing attempts I've ever seen. If you take a look at it, I don't think it's in the... let me zoom out a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. You can see here that it's got a padlock right here. That's actually zoomed out so far, I'm not sure we can see it. There we go. So it's got a padlock right there, and you can see here that it also says HTTPS. Okay. So this looks like a secure site because they actually do have a certificate. Nevertheless, it is definitely a phishing attempt. And by the way, I did talk to my wife in the gentle, nurturing tone that I do as a very patient husband. Tongue-in-cheek going on there a little bit. And I told her, why did you click on this? I told you a million times you should never click on those kinds of emails that try to get banking information out of you. And then she put her hands on her hips and gave me that look that I've seen way too many times. And she said, you told me that if it started with HTTPS, that I would be safe. All right, fine. I haven't won an argument in like 20 years of marriage, people. It keeps going downhill, apparently. Anyway, so this is an example of a certificate. This was actually used in a wrong way, but most of the time, you actually can trust them with some relative certainty. Trusted certs will come from public certification authorities. In fact, that one I just showed you there, when I double-clicked on it to look at where the certificate came from, it came from a well-known certification authority that is generally trusted. And I've committed to them that I would not reveal who they are, but if I mention their name, you would know who they are. So anyway, generally speaking, though, they're going to come from public CAs, and if they're not from a public CA, you need to add them manually. And this might be the case if you have a website for your intranet that has a certificate, and maybe it encrypts traffic. For example, people from the Human Resources Department may have to log into a different portion of your intranet because they handle people's salaries, and maybe they have ERP software, or any of those kinds of things that they have to protect. Well, they may need that certificate, and you may need to add the certificate to that user's computer so that they're not going to see troubling messages about whenever they try to go to that website. Let me show you what I mean here. If I go back over to my handy little browser here and I go to my router's address, which is actually just a Linksys router, then if I press enter here, you'll notice that it says, oops, there's a problem with this website's security certificate. Why is that? Well, because I'm trying to go to 10.10.10.1, but when I continue to this website, it's going to show me the actual certificate problem up here at the top. So I'm going to enter my credentials and then I'll show you. And there it is. It says certificate error right here. So we can view the certificate. Now, here's the problem. The certificate is, if we look at the details of this, it's not going to have a name that's anything like where we're trying to go. So if I go over here to the subject, here, then we can see that the the common name here is Linksys, and I didn't go to Linksys up here at the top. I went to an IP address. So therefore, Internet Explorer prompts me with this, saying, hey, this might be an imposter, this might not be where you think it is, because the name of this certificate doesn't match. This would also be the case if the dates were invalid, so it was an expired certificate, for example, something like that. But in this case, I happen to know that it's okay, so I went ahead and continued on. But you don't want the users to see that baffling message, because they get a knee-jerk reaction and they say, oh no, I shouldn't go there, or else I could get a virus and get myself in trouble. So anyway, you may have to add those manually. Now, this will not address the situation where the name mismatches or where the date is wrong, but if it comes from a CA that you don't trust or don't know about, then you have to add that manually. Now, let me show you how you would do that. You can do it actually a couple of different ways. One thing I could do is I could go to Tools and Internet Options, Security, and then I could go down here to actually, it's not in security. It's in content. Content, and then I could go to certificates. So you could go to certificates or publishers. They actually both open the same dialog box. They just take you to different tabs. But you would go to Trusted Root Certification Authorities, and then you would import. And then you would look for a certificate that you had previously exported from some other machine. So, for example, I would click on Browse, and I happen to put one right on my desktop. This is from one of my own servers. And I would just double-click to add this certificate in. Once I next finish my way through this, I want to put it in the Trusted Root Certification Authorities. Then from that point forward, it would trust any certificates that came from that particular CA. Now, because it's in a different domain and everything, it's not able to verify it, but I, as the administrator, could say, yes, I know it's a trusted certificate. I'll go ahead and click on yes and install that certificate. So that would be one way that I could go about doing this. And of course, that gave me a red X because I'm canceling all this. The other way you could do that would be to use a group policy object. Now, this is something you have to do as a group policy object that's linked to the domain somewhere. You cannot do this on a local group policy. So in other words, you can't type gpedit.msc from a command line and use that method. You have to use this one. So, for example, for my domain maybe there was a certificate that I trusted, so I'll say, trusted root CAs. And then I would just go in here and choose edit. From this point, then, I would go to Policies, and I'm going to go quickly through this, so if you need to pause and look at this again, you can certainly do that. But I'm going to Windows Settings, Security Settings. I have to slow down anyway because I have an hourglass. But go to Security Settings, and then I would go to... Wow, that took forever to expand. Then I would go down here to Public Key Policies. Notice that underneath this, I can say Trusted Root Certification Authorities, right-click, Import, Browse for this certificate, which I haven't put on my desktop yet. So let me do that real quick. And I'll paste in a certificate here. And then I'll just click Open. And then once again, it would be a next finish till I imported it into the Trusted Root Certification Authorities. And then we would trust any certificates that came from this CA. And then if those certificates were part of any web browsers that I had in my intranet, for example, at that point forward, they should be trusted. I want to point another thing out about this as well, by the way. If the client that's doing the browsing and the server are both in the same domain, in an Active Directory domain, then in Active Directory it will automatically add the certificate to the Trusted Root Certification Authorities of the domain clients. And you shouldn't have to do this. So the only time I might have to do this is if I'm working with another domain's websites or something like that. But then I'd click on Finish, and that would pretty much be it. And you can see the import was successful. So there we go. In this nugget, we took a look at Internet Explorer. We took a look at the various providers and add-ons, such as the search provider that you decide to use, whether or not you want to translate web pages, the accelerators is part of what all that is. We also took a look at in private settings, which will delete cache, history, what was the other one? Cookies, it deletes all of those things for you if you need that. Also, we took a look at security and security zones. This will be pre-configured settings, which will have a higher or a lower level of security as appropriate for you. And then we took a look also at certificates, how they work, and how to also import a certificate if necessary, so that you're not presented with any nag screens about problems with a certificate. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.